Joyce Davis. I'm PennLive's Outreach and Opinion Editor, and this is an editorial board meeting. And as you know, we deal with some pretty hot topics here in these editorial board meetings, and this one is simmering, and it is definitely one that I think people want to know more about. It's data centers and what they will mean for our communities, what they will mean, I think, for the environment. And that's why we have invited someone with the Environmental Defense Fund to come and speak to us. We have Michael Zimmerman here and also Chris Whitlock. And so I'm going to turn it over to, I guess, to Chris so that you can do the introductions and tell us what we need to know about data centers.
Well, thank you, Joyce, and thank you to the editorial board for giving us this time today. Data centers are definitely a hot topic around Pennsylvania, and there are many different concerns. And Michael Zimmerman is here today from Environmental Defense Fund, and I'll let him introduce himself, and he can talk to some specific issues around affordability in particular and other things going on and things that we might need to keep an eye on moving forward with this particular topic. Michael, if you could take the floor.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And thanks, Joyce and the PennLive team for having me. As Chris said, I'm an attorney with the Environmental Defense Fund, specifically on the Clean Affordable Power team. Joyce, I couldn't agree more when you said that the data center topic is simmering. I like to think that we're cooking a soup that ultimately will be a good one. There are a couple of recent sort of milestones that I'd like to touch on today. But I guess before we do, just by way of top line impact, there's been a fair amount of press on sort of the impacts of data centers on electricity customers, energy customers. I mean, just to highlight a couple. Look, there have been a lot of things that have been pushing up folks' energy bills over time. Data centers are one piece of larger puzzle, but they're a particularly important piece. I projected data center demand in the PJM region, that's the 13 states, including Pennsylvania, could go up 40% in 2035. And in PPL service territory, that's the utility that serves Harrisburg. They're looking at potentially doubling their total electric demand over the next 5 or 6 years, driven by data centers.
Now, wait, just stop there, because you just threw a number, a figure at me that kind of has me reeling. 40%. Now, what are you saying 40%? 40% usage or 40% the cost to consumers, or what's that 40%?
40% refers to the peak demand. So the total amount of electricity being asked of the electric system at one time, at the peak period, which will probably be a hot afternoon in August. That's usually when the grid hits its peak, and that's the number that planners have to plan for, right? The grid needs to be there. It's planned against that sort of bad case scenario. So that number, right, is poised. We're on a hockey stick projection at the moment, and most of that appears to be driven by data centers. And like I said, PPL, Central Pennsylvania, is a hotbed of the Northeast of data center development. We can question a little bit how accurate the forecasts are, but I think any forecast you take, we're looking at significant increases in electric demand. In the short term, that is putting upward pressure on prices, right? That projected demand makes it into the models that planners use to develop how much electricity the system needs to buy, utilities need to plan for to serve that load in the future. We saw wholesale power costs go up over 50% last year, and much of that is due in part to data centers. Again, I do want to be clear. There are other things driving up electric bills, and actually I would love to touch on some later. But this is an important one to flag. So what can we do about it, right? Or what's being done? The answer, unfortunately, as with many things in the utility space, is it's complicated. I know more about some of the areas than others, and so I'm going to focus on those things that are sort of closer to my expertise and closer to what the state can actually influence, right? One of the most important things the state can do is set rules of the road as between utilities and their data center customers. Right? These are called tariff rules. Tariff in the utility context doesn't refer to taxes. It refers to the set of agreements, or the set of rules that govern relationships between the utilities and customers. We're all subject. If you're a utility customer, you're subject to a utility tariff, probably multiple tariffs. And the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission has been working on a model tariff that would apply to large load customers. That's data centers and other customers with very large electric demands. And just on Tuesday, we finally got their order. And so I think many of us are still digesting it, but I will sort of, about everything that it will mean, but I will flag a few important parts of it. One is it sets out a robust cost assignment policy for those costs that are within the PUC's jurisdiction. That's the transmission and distribution lines. They get the power to the customer, not the generators themselves, right? But the order says, in effect, any utility transmission or distribution facility that is built because of a data center, or put it another way, any infrastructure that wouldn't have been built but for that data center has to be paid for by the data center, right? And not only that, but they have to pay it up front. In utility lingo, it's called contribution in aid of construction, or kayak. You'll hear the term kayak thrown around sometimes. Maybe it's just at the parties I go to. But that probably puts Pennsylvania in the vanguard, right? There's a growing consensus across the industry, impressively so, that data centers should pay their own way. That's great in principle, right? It's harder to actually apply that. And the order we got from the commission on Tuesday sort of sets out, it articulates that a little bit further, what it means to actually assign those delivery costs to the data center customer. I will point out, it's a statement of principle. Our work is not done, not by a long shot, for two reasons that I'd like to call out. Number one, the order is not binding. It is a set of guidelines that utilities may adopt or may not in utility-specific proceedings. So I think Environmental Defense Fund and many other advocates across the state are going to be working hard to make sure that utilities adopt the best parts of what's in that order. Number two, it's not necessarily easy to tie back a given transmission system upgrade to the customer that initially triggered it, right? These customers are very big. The grid is an interconnected machine. And so a big customer coming on over here can have impacts over there. And so it's going to require a lot of sustained focus and analysis and attention and leadership, much of which should come from the state, to make sure that we're actually identifying those costs and assigning them to the data centers that cause them. Why don't I pause here for a moment? Well, Joyce, maybe you can tell me, is this a good time to pause for questions?
It's a good time before we get too far down the line. So let me just throw out one quick question at you as you've done. You've made it clear that we're going to see a spike in usage for sure, which is going to affect everyone, because the question will be, will this lead us to not having enough power? I don't want to not have my air conditioner in August. But the other question that I guess I'm concerned with, because I've heard, why wouldn't the utility company want to make them pay their fair? Why would this be twisting someone's arm to ensure that they pay their fair share, right? What's going on here?
Good. So I'll try to touch on both those issues. I'll start in reverse order. So why wouldn't a utility want a large load customer to pay their fair share? It's not always easy to make them do that. The problem is concentrated costs versus diffuse costs. So it can be hard when you're trying to cut a deal, when you're trying to get, for example, a data center by Meta, right? For example, I'm just throwing out a company, interconnected. And that customer requires you to build $50 million worth of transmission costs. It's hard to go to Meta with a $50 million bill and say, come on, guys, you got to pony up or you're not getting service, right? It's a lot easier to take that $50 million, and to put it into your rate base. That is the pool of shared utility infrastructure that goes into rates, gets socialized across everybody, right? And as we know,
is the theory that we would benefit from these data centers, so it makes sense that the consumers would pay for them.
Yes, and look, there's something to that. Historically, we treated the transmission system as a shared asset, right? On the theory that an upgrade benefits everybody on that system, or most upgrades benefit everybody, and so it's fair for everybody to chip in. Data centers really break down that historical paradigm because they are so big, right? A data center will disproportionately slurp up all the benefits of the facilities that they're on. I should say, not just the new facilities built in response to them, but also the existing facilities, right? That may have existing headroom that they're going to benefit from as well. And there actually is a surprising amount of consensus among the industry that dynamic is different, right? That data centers behave differently with respect to these ostensibly shared assets than other historical customers. So you also touched on, Joyce, your question touched on electric supply. How do we make sure there's going to be enough juice available? That is a really difficult question and a very important one. And I will say that the Tuesday's order did not really touch on that issue. What we call in the utility space resource adequacy, or making sure there's enough generation, is predominantly within federal jurisdiction. The feds are working hard at figuring out a way to address the potential shortfall, and there is a shortfall on the not too distant horizon in our region. Part of what we need more generation to be brought online. There's a lot of generation trying to be built that the grid operator is currently analyzing. The operator's this is the regional operator. They've taken a lot of flack over recent years about it taking too long to get approved to connect, although they have been making some changes to their process to try to expedite. I would also say any conversation, though, about there being enough supply, you need to talk about the demand as well, right? Energy prices are a product of supply and demand. And if you're only focused on building more generation, you're missing opportunities to manage your issue by addressing the demand side of the equation, right? It will frequently be cheaper to pay someone to turn their air conditioning down a little bit in summertime than it will be to build a whole new big power plant to serve that additional load. I wouldn't mind getting a check to turn my air conditioner down in the summertime, right? Particularly if it means avoiding the construction of a new power plant. Reverend Strauss, sorry, I've been talking over you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Reverend Strauss.
Yes, I was just wondering how the current administration's attempts to prevent more renewable energy coming online are going to affect this, because I mean, there's been some active work to try to stop more solar and wind, particularly wind, I think. But yeah, how will that affect things, or will it affect things?
It will, and it is. So, and adversely, when PJM, the grid operator, procures power for the future, it's called capacity. It's like a future contract. You're paying generators to be around 3 years from now, right? You're basically buying that promise from them. The cost of that capacity is at the cap. PJM could not charge any more legally than they already are for that capacity, right? Which signals that there is not enough generation in the region today, right? And there isn't expected to be enough, right, 3 years from now. Getting more capacity online, including renewables, does put downward pressure on capacity prices, right? Because those renewables are going to be there generating power, right, at 0% margin, at $0 marginal costs, right? They don't have any fuel, right? So they can bid in on those markets pretty cheap. I would say that at a time when we probably need as many electrons as we can get, right? Going out of your way to prevent electrons from coming online, particularly when they are among the cheapest electrons you can get, is uniquely short-sighted. I will say, adding insult to injury are some of this administration's efforts to pay developers who would otherwise build those renewables to not build them. That is exceptionally bad policy. And EDF is engaged in litigation on a number of fronts. I am not, but some of my colleagues are engaged in litigation on a number of fronts against those short-sighted efforts.
Before we let you continue explaining, breaking this all down to us, because this is in everybody's mind, but there really isn't clarity about, what we're dealing with here. But are some of the data centers are they themselves looking at renewable, using solar, using other things themselves rather than having to go into the grid?
Absolutely. Well, so two parts to that response. Number one, you mentioned, Joyce, you said without having to go to the grid. In the utility lingo, we would call that like an islanded microgrid, right? Like you're on your own mini grid, right? Disconnected. I don't think many data centers are looking to do that right now because the grid just delivers so many benefits, right? The United States grid is very reliable, right? And it's pretty cheap comparatively, right? As compared to building your own network. And these data centers value, many of them value continued electric service so highly, right? That they want that extra security, right? As a foundation for their business. That may change in the future, right? But that's my understanding of where things stand now. With respect to, though, like data centers procuring their own generation, look, whether you're connected to the grid or not, many data centers still want to buy their own generation, right? They want to know that that's going to be there. And many of them are looking at renewables, both because they may have corporate climate goals and because procuring those renewables will often be the cheapest way to get power soonest. So there's both political and operational and, frankly, optics, PR benefits to doing that.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Another question on the, we're talking costs solely right now, but it's my understanding that these centers are also not helpful environmentally in terms of water usage and things like that. Am I correct about that? And how, I haven't heard anything about that yet, and I'm just curious what you're doing with regard to that end of things.
Yeah, you haven't heard about that from me because that's outside of my wheelhouse. I do have some colleagues that are doing work on water issues as well as on sort of the local criteria air pollution impacts of data centers. For example, running, backup diesel generators. But that's outside of my utility nerd wheelhouse, I'm afraid.
Okay, but that's one of the concerns I think that certainly I'm assuming the EDF has to make sure that these are not going to in some way have an adverse impact on the environment. But continue. I think we're clear on several things. We're clear that there's going to be a spike. We're clear that it could end up really challenging the system, the grid, especially at those high peak times. We're looking at the possibility of cost increases for sure. And we're looking at, unfortunately, alternative fuels not being encouraged at this point to offset some of that. Are those 4 points right?
You got it.
All right, Vinny, I see your hands up.
So one of the renewables, I guess, is water that they're using to cool the servers in this warehouse. Basically, that's what data centers are. They're just warehouses housing the servers. So when they come to you, like you explained before, they want to build and you say, sure, go ahead, and they build. But can you ever say, no, like we have enough right now, we don't have the capacity for the water in this area to cool another center? Because that's millions of gallons. Yeah. So I was just wondering, can you somehow not close it down, slow it down until we've seen the impact of what's happening?
Well, that's a good question. Who authorizes this? I mean, what is that process?
Good questions. I'm probably not the best person. My understanding is there's a lot of that data center development involves a lot of permitting and various types of administrative approvals that municipalities may have a role, the state may have a role, but potentially multiple agencies within each of those subdivisions may have a role in approving different aspects of data center construction, just like building any other type of large facility. I'm also aware that many municipalities and some states are considering moratoria on data center development, varying durations, although I'm not familiar with specifics. I will speak to Vinny. Your question raises sort of an interesting question with respect to the electric space, right? So, you were asking me, can we say no with respect to connecting to the water system or using the water? Well, you could ask that same question about the electric system, right? Can we say, no, you can't have electricity because we're not ready? There are some interesting legal questions about that, right? Like utilities in Pennsylvania, as in most states, have a legal obligation to serve customers, right? That's the obligation they bear in return for having a monopoly in their service territory. But at the same time, it may be reasonable to defer service or condition service in some cases where needed or where appropriate to safeguard, the integrity of the grid, right? Or even to safeguard the rates of other customers. And so there's sort of an interesting live legal debate going on right now about how far does that extend, right? What sort of rights does the regulator have, right? Or even the obligation does the regulator have to condition certain types of customers' service based on the needs of the grid at the time? I will say that's another aspect that the Public Utility Commission's order on Tuesday touched on, but didn't dig into in great detail. I suspect we're going to be having more conversations along those lines.
So is there more you would like to share with us about exactly what was decided on Thursday?
Well, I touched on the big piece. I'll give you a couple of other highlights. The order endorsed the idea of large loads paying toward utility low-income customer assistance programs. Pennsylvania is one of the only states, maybe the only state in the country, that allows utilities to recover those program costs only from residential customers. All other states spread those costs to all customer classes because it's a public good. And so it's looking like in Pennsylvania, utilities are going to start asking large load customers to chip in toward those program costs. That's a good idea. Mm-hmm. I think I would skip to one while we just have a little bit of time left. One thing that was touched on in the order, but I think there's a lot more room for forward movement, is with respect to curtailable or non-firm service, right? The options for utilities to interrupt service to large load customers during times of peak grid stress. The order touched on it, but didn't really resolve those issues. But there's some research just came out of Johns Hopkins suggesting that doing that is like the single most impactful lever you can pull in terms of reducing near-term system costs, right? If you are able to turn off a customer, right, during periods of grid stress, you don't need to build, right? That reduces the peak that you need to plan for. There's probably also a lot of opportunity. If a data center doesn't want to be disconnected during those peak times, fine, pay somebody else to curtail instead. Even better, pay lots of people, right, to ramp down their usage a little bit instead, because doing that will not only address the problem of not having enough generation, it can also help reduce the distribution system cost. That's the cost of the poles and the wires right outside my house, right, that are also not being strained when I turn my air conditioner down in the summertime, right? So there's a lot of promise there. If we can sort of link the tremendous demand that data centers are putting on for energy with the tremendous potential supply that all of us have at our homes, right, at our disposal.
Yeah, I think when these concepts are clear. Yeah, I can turn down my air conditioning, but by how much? And is there the possibility that I don't have power for an hour at all? I mean, so what are we talking about here? If we're talking about lower, like I have it on 70, I lower it to 68, or or do I have to lower it to 50? I mean, what's going on? What are we talking about? Yeah.
I would say there are an unlimited number of ways you could structure this type of program. I would say I would not be in favor of any programs that involve stuff that are going to make people uncomfortable, that are going to make them unsafe, right? That are going to be undesirable, right? You got to make a program that's where you're compensating a person to an extent that's worth it to them, right? I guess I raise it because when you look at existing, it's called demand response in utility lingo. When you look at existing demand response programs, most people are willing to accept a far lower price to shave a little bit, right? To move a couple of degrees on their thermostat. They're willing to do that for way cheaper than it is to build a new gas turbine right now on a unitized basis, right? It costs you, well, I won't throw a bunch of utility nerd numbers at you, but suffice it to say, it's orders of magnitude cheaper, right, to do that. And people are doing that not because they're being forced to, right? They're enrolling in these programs, participating because they want to, because it's worth it to them.
And it's enough. I mean, the point is, can you do it enough? Is that 1 degree really going to make a difference, or that 2 degrees?
Yeah, on its own, no, probably not. We probably need more. I will say a group called Rewiring America put an analysis out over the summer suggesting that in Texas, installing residential solar and batteries on everybody's homes could serve all new data center load and could do it for less money than building new gas plants, right? Now that's not going to be true everywhere. You have to tailor the solution to the jurisdiction. But
yeah, because it's a lot of sun in Texas, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. But and is
Joyce,
that one of the
Joyce,
things?
there are
Yeah, go
other
ahead.
solutions that you can do on that demand side too. You can have programs where homes and buildings can improve their insulation and therefore use less electricity load. You can have programs where you can upgrade equipment both in homes and businesses. So it could be upgrading your air conditioning or water heater, having a heat pump in your house. It could be upgrading refrigeration in a business. Any of those types of programs can reduce load as well.
I see.
Basis.
I see. Vinny, you had another question. Go ahead.
I actually think, David, you might be up first.
Oh, I didn't see he didn't have anything up.
It's all right.
Yes,
Vinny, please take the question.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Vinny, go ahead.
So besides putting a heat down, the data centers are powered by people asking Google things. Isn't that right? Like, hey, Google, like now every 2 minutes, I'm always asking Google something. And that's using energy.
Yeah.
Is that not right? And isn't that driving up the costs? So if we would educate people, like what are we doing when we ask Google a question and it's really hot out? Can Google wait before we answer that question? Like, are there other ways
is there a
of
way to curtail
mitigating electricity?
Yeah. I mean, probably, I guess. I think could they wait? Probably. Will they? I think is sort of the more interesting question.
Right.
I've heard from some hyperscalers will tell you that they don't have the option to turn down a request. For example, Amazon Web Services, most of the internet traffic they host is not their own traffic, right? They're a supplier. They have other customers. They have contractual obligations. I would say Google is maybe among the best in the business at being able to move sort of the compute load, the demands on their servers between different regions. Because they're such a big company, they're sort of the incumbent, and they have a lot of really, really smart people on their team, right, that have figured out a lot of this stuff. If you ask a question, maybe the server in Iowa doesn't handle it. If it's stressed in Iowa, maybe it pushes that query over to some other region that is less stressed at the time.
David, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Joyce. This is a compelling conversation. I'm curious about how customers can have more transparency in what their exposure is to the bill. Trying to understand megahertz and megawatts and how that relates to your monthly bill is almost impossible. And I've asked the PUC to be more transparent about it, but I'm going to lean on your expertise as to why there's not common sense solutions. If we have the need for data centers to process large language models very quickly, then we should certainly be able to incorporate our megawatts to dollars and cents very quickly. And why that hasn't been done is just a personal point of question for me. And secondarily, I'd love to get your response through your national lens on who's doing it right. You mentioned some of the things that infrastructures that Texas is building to mitigate their demand on data centers. Obviously, Northern Virginia is the capital of data center development, and how are they able to mitigate a quality of life, which Northern Virginia always gets high ratings for quality of life with the overabundance of data centers. So I'd love for you to navigate those understandings for me through your national purview, particularly within environmental lens.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'll do my best. So starting with your first question about transparency, look, full disclosure, I've been with EDF for 2.5 years. Before that, I worked for Pittsburgh's electric utility, Duquesne Light. Although to be clear, I'm not representing them in any behalf on this discussion. But I'll tell you, like, we always struggled with this issue because like it's complicated, right? And most people don't have the time to dedicate to learning how the utility system is going to work, all the different things that go into their bill. I mean, look, I'm a utility nerd and I don't read my electric bill every month. I see how much the total number is.
What I'm submitting, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what I'm submitting,
Yeah.
It's impossible for a lay person to best understand how they can mitigate those costs. It's impossible for a lay person. And I'm curious as to why the industry, the Public Utility Commission, which is the governing body of that industry, hasn't made more significant steps to make it more possible for a citizen to understand that bill and mitigate those costs.
Yeah, I I suspect that it's a product of incentives. I mean, look, that the utility is a monopoly. Customers are going to buy their electric service from the utility, whether they understand it or not. So I think I think utilities are beginning to do a better job at this, but they're still behind many other industries in terms of the strength in explaining to customers why things are the way they are and what customers can do about it, right? Like I think other industries are better at articulating the value proposition, and you see some growth, some progress in other jurisdictions that have allowed additional competition with respect to certain utility services. For example, in the UK, sort of middlemen, other third-party providers are allowed to bid on distribution services, and they can not just the energy services that they deliver to customers, but also like the costs of the poles and wires that deliver those services to customers. They're able to offer products to customers that allow them that enable them to cut their bills. And the ins and outs of those products are, I think, extremely technically complex, but the end result tends to be lower bills for customers. Am I getting at your question, David? I'm not sure I am.
Yeah, no, it's helpful. I was just actually looking for some direction for advocacy to the Public Utilities Commission. I know many of the members of the Public Utilities Commission, and I see them as our front line of defense when it comes about citizens of Pennsylvania. I recognize that you are from Pittsburgh, so I just wanted you to use your national lens to give me some instructions on how we can advocate, because to me, this is one of the big problems with the whole energy process, is that people don't know what they're paying for. So if we could solve for that, I think it can start to build some more equity, moving down the line.
So, I think that a big thing, I think that the Pennsylvania Commission is intensely interested in hearing that type of feedback, right? I think that they care deeply about what ordinary people, not just grid nerds like me, think about their utility service. I would, in fact, in this model tariff docket that I was just mentioning, right, that where we got the order on Tuesday, there were tremendous, unprecedented number of comments filed by normal citizens, right? I mean, like, I can send you the link to the docket page. You have to scroll. You just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And many of those comments were not articulating like the specific technical solutions they wanted to see. They were articulating the results that they wanted, right? I want X, Y, and Z. I want to not pay for the facilities built to serve a data center, right? The how you get there, well, that's the commission's job, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they're the experts. And I'll say, like, with respect to this model load tariff, like, I think they heard people. So I would encourage folks to participate in those proceedings. I recognize that it involves creating an account online. You need to keep up with sort of filings. It can be inconvenient. It's not easy. But if you are able to invest the time to sort of write down what you care about and send it into the commission, I do think that it has an impact. And when you do, I would encourage people to articulate the results you want to see.
But David, I think it's a good idea.
I'm more interested in having our editor, Joyce, when she sends the invitation out, it's hard to ignore. So
that's what I was going to say, David. I think you've just raised an issue that perhaps we should do an invitation to them to come and answer these kinds of questions. So very good. We'll put that one down there.
On the second part, just briefly, like what regions are doing it best in terms of data centers, and what can we learn from?
Yeah. I would love to be able to tell you who's doing it best. I can't right now. I can tell you there are some people who are doing varying things better than others, right? So the state of Oregon has passed a statute requiring data centers to bring their own new clean generation, right? You want to connect a data center, you need to bring enough new renewables to offset your power needs. That's a good idea, right? Other states are also considering that. House Bill 1834, which recently passed the House and is waiting to be introduced, a companion bill in the Senate, would require data centers to bring a percentage of new clean generation to meet a portion of their load. There are Georgia Power just developed a new product. This is a vertically integrated utility in the South, but is seeing significant data center interest. They might be number 3 after Virginia and Texas. that would expedite interconnection for data centers that bring their own new clean energy. Great idea. There are sort of varying efforts, including in Virginia and Maryland, to think more fully about how data centers can pair with demand response, right, as a way of sort of addressing some of their energy needs. And then there are some pretty good sort of other customer protection type of tariffs coming out of the Midwest, coming out of Indiana and Ohio, about sort of preventing data utilities from passing data center related costs on to other customers. So I maybe in a future conversation, this is an area I would love to do a lot more homework on. I mean, it's a fast moving space, so it's tough to keep up with all the developments, but would be happy to do a further conversation down the road, sort of a comparative view of the different jurisdictions.
Well, it sounds like it's a moving target. I mean, this is a process that's developing now. So one area may be developing one aspect and then another aspect. But here's what I guess I think we all want to know. What would the EDF like to see? Are you pleased with this most recent decision? Is it enough, or does more need to be done? And what role do you think ordinary consumers like us can play in making sure this develops as it ought to protect us?
Yep. With respect to your first question, Joyce, are we pleased or is there more to be done? Yes, to both. So I think the order sets out important policy positions with respect to cost allocation. But there's a lot more work to be done to make sure that policy position is actually followed through on, right? We have a lot of implementation work ahead of us. And then we also have a lot of policy development work to do around curtailable service, non-firm service, right? And about making sure that there's going to be enough generation supply down the road. I anticipate that there's going to be a lot of proceedings, a lot of ongoing discussion at the commission and at the legislature to address those issues, among others. What can people do about it? I would say don't let the pressure off your regulators or your legislators. We do need legislation in Pennsylvania to address many of these data center issues. The Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission is a creature of state statute. They probably need additional, or it would probably be helpful for them to have additional express authorization with respect to what sorts of things can they ask data centers to do. HB 1834 would help with that, right? But honestly, probably even more would be helpful. So we would urge folks to encourage the legislators not to take their foot off the accelerator. And also I don't know how normal people get their news about what's going on at the PUC. I guess maybe that's something you can help me with. But however they get their news, when opportunities for comment come up, like this model large tariff, I would encourage them to get in touch with the people with experts who can help them understand what those opportunities mean for them, and to file comments at the commission. And EDF is happy to try to be part of that discussion, right? I would like folks to think of us as a resource, understanding there are some things we can speak to and other things we can't. But when we can speak to it, right, we want to try to help other people understand it as best as possible.
Right. Have you come up with some specific policy recommendations or things that you're just advocating for at this point?
Yes, gosh. We filed comments in the model large load tariff docket. They're pretty they're pretty in the weeds. So I'd be happy to share it to you, but I think it's probably pretty dry for most readers. We are planning to publish a set of sort of data center principles in the near future. Those aren't quite done, so I probably shouldn't speak to them here, but they're coming.
All right, very good. Well, it sounds like this is an attempt for you guys to at least alert the public that this is, look, your utility bill is one of the most important things, I think, for all of us, right? What does it take? How much do we have to pay to keep our homes comfortable? And will we be able to keep our homes comfortable if there's so much demand for that power? So those are two key questions for every consumer, which would kind of motivate us to take a little bit more effort in figuring all of this out, right? But I do think people like you who understand the issues, thank you for taking the time to kind of simplify it as much as possible and alert us, hey, look over here. You need to be looking now. That's important because it sounds like that's what you're saying. You need to pay attention now. It's important. Is that correct?
That's correct. I will say it's always been important. It's particularly important now. We really are approaching an inflection point. And so and I'll say it's fantastic that so many people are paying attention, right? And thank you for helping to get the word out.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions? Anything else burning? Yes, go ahead, Reverend Strauss.
Yes. And I don't know that there is an answer to this, but you've talked before about how regular customers like us might be able to do things to hold down our costs, whether it's insulation, all that.
Yeah.
Is there anything going on the data center front that they can find ways to curb the amount of energy they need to use?
Yes. The amount of energy that data centers use, my understanding is it's generally a relatively small fraction of their operating costs. I've heard numbers from like 10% to 30% of their operating costs. But their operating costs are a lot, right? So if they're rational business actors, if you can shave some money off that, that's savings for you. So I think that data centers have a natural financial incentive to find ways to control their energy use. I would say that the recent order by the Public Utility Commission amplifies those incentives, right? If a data center can control their use, that may be fewer transmission lines they need to pay for, right? Which is a good idea. I also anticipate, that utilities also operate energy efficiency programs. All residential customers are eligible for them. I do not know off the top of my head how many data center customers will be eligible for those programs, but I would say there are resources out there for most or all customers in Pennsylvania to reduce their energy use without reducing their standard of living. Right. And so it's, always a good idea to check with your local utility to see what programs might be good for you.
And actually, I should mention, because my congregation here in Harrisburg went to PP&L, which does provide that service for houses of worship and others. And they've been tremendously helpful. So I'm hoping that there's some of that goes on with the data centers as well.
Very good. Very good. Are there any other questions or anything that has not been said that needs to be said? If not, please, I thank you so much again to the EDF for taking the time, to Michael and Chris, to explain what is clearly a complicated but very important topic for us. So check out the editorial. We'll be having it published probably next week. Thanks now. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.